At InDigital, we know the public safety professionals hold themselves to a high standard. In fact, standard doesn't do it justice. In over 25 years working alongside you, carrying millions of calls over our IP networks, your dedication has inspired us. That's why our ESI Net goes beyond industry standards, not only I3 compliant, but designed to adapt to future development for a network you can count on when it matters most. Learn more at indigital.net.
Here in Greenville County, we have 8 different places where a 911 call can be answered.
It is the largest county in South Carolina. It's a challenge.
The type of information that a telecommunicator gets from Radius Plus is location-based technology. You can see where the caller is, if they have a medical issue, if they speak a different language. They're immediately able to text to that caller in their native language. It reduces response times because it immediately gets first responders where they need to be.
If Within the Trenches has ever taught you something, open your eyes to what it is like to be a 911 dispatcher, or has inspired you to become one, then help support us and join our Patreon. Get exclusive bonus content, one-of-a-kind swag, discounts on merchandise, ad-free early access to new episodes, and much more. To join, please visit patreon.com/WTT podcast. And if you're an industry partner, we have something for you as well. And now, for the show.
This is Jordan, and you're listening to the Code 7 Podcast Network.
Warning. This episode contains the 3 A's of podcasting: adult content, adult language, and awesomeness. You've been warned.
Welcome to Within the Trenches, true stories from the 911 dispatchers who live them.
Hey, what's going on? This is Ricardo of the Code 7 Podcast Network, and this is going to be Within the Trenches, true stories from the 911 dispatchers who live them. This episode is sponsored by InDigital, as well as Rapid Deploy and Carbine, and a big shout out to patrons, as always, for everything. Thank you so very much. It is February 21st, and holy hell, we're already going to be at the end of this month. It's going super fast. So many things that are going on. You know, there's so many awesome episodes that are going to be coming up. We are right at the beginning of conference season. So I'm going to be heading out to a bunch of different public safety conferences, doing Imagine Listening sessions. I think I have maybe a keynote or a closing in there somewhere. I got to double check. And just a lot of open mic lives, dispatchers roundtable, new episodes that are going to be coming up for that, so make sure to check that out. Also, a perk for patrons only is you end up getting audio versions of the DRT, the dispatchers roundtable, as well as open mic live. And if you missed the most recent open mic live, oh man, you missed a good one. I told a story about me on a plane and all of us having to run, and it was like straight up Jumanji with everybody running through that tunnel trying to get to their connecting flight. And this lady, she had me go ahead of her because she said that I would run faster than her. Nope. She flew by me like Sonic the Hedgehog. It was just a flash of blue lightning going by. It was crazy. If you haven't heard the story or anything, or checked out open mic, make sure to check it out. It was hilarious. It was such a good time. Also, some more Singing Badly in My Car videos are going to be coming out as well for patrons only. So make sure to check that out. And for today, for this episode, I am very excited to have my guest on. I met her a while back, and I ended up doing her podcast, which is Guns and Yoga. It was an excellent time. And my guest today is Wendy Hummell. She's a retired detective and also the podcast host and creator of Guns and Yoga. Good morning.
Hi, how are you?
Oh, before we got started recording, I don't know if I'm all right.
I told you to slow down on the caffeine.
I know. Yes. And it's funny though, because I never drink coffee, at least not anymore. I used to drink it all the time when I was in dispatch, but I don't know, for some reason it just doesn't do stuff for me. But I started drinking coffee because there was so for like my back pain and neck pain and stuff, sometimes I'll take like CBD gummies, And there was the company that I get them from, they have like a CBD infused coffee. And I thought, I wonder how that would work because, it's supposed to kind of relax you. So how does the caffeine work? And I guess all the different things that they have, they counteract each other to just balance it out. And it's actually been pretty good. It's not bad. I don't
Awesome.
know.
Well, it definitely has woken you up this morning.
Yeah, I needed it because last night my family was they're visiting from Florida, and we were up really late just talking and laughing and stuff. And I thought, oh man, I'm gonna be dragging ass the next morning, but nope, I'm doing pretty good.
Yeah, you
Everything has
are.
been well. I'm trying. Everything has been good. So how have you been? Because when was it that we did your podcast?
Okay, so you had to ask me that. I don't know exactly, but it's
It
been
was
a
a
minute.
long time ago, right?
Well, the
It
podcast,
seems like it.
yeah, it just my husband and I were just talking about this. We've
Mhm.
had it's been about a year since we started it, and you were one of the earlier guests, so sometime within the last year.
Oh, man, yeah. Well, and like I said in the beginning, it's February 21st,
Yeah,
and the time is just rolling by really fast. It feels like the start of the month was last week.
I am with you. Ever since the begin really, this year feels like, I mean, it's almost I can't believe how quickly it's gone. So, I'm with you.
Ugh. And I don't remember where you're located from, but how is, like, the weather and everything over there? Because over here, it's actually 45 right now, but a few days ago, it was, like, 8.
Okay, so the weather in Kansas is insane if you don't know
Oh,
anything about it. So, we had a snowstorm and it was like, single digits, double digit temperatures. And then today is going to be almost 70 degrees. And yesterday it was in the 60s. And then it's going to get cold again. So it's really hard to answer. It's just every day it changes. And actually, it can change depending on the time of day too. So
oh, man. So, go home, Mother Nature, you're drunk.
pretty much, because my allergies are like, "What's going on? Is it nice out? Is it cold out?" So, yeah, I don't.
All whacked out all over the place.
Yeah.
So in your title, you said retired detective and podcast host and creator. I want to go back to this really quick because we were talking about this right before we started. There's a lot of different things you do. So for those who are watching and listening who might not be familiar with you, can you kind of add a little more to that title and things that you do before we get into your story?
Sure. So it's funny because when you asked me that, I was like, wow, this is like one of the hardest questions you're going to ask me today. Because, yeah, so you are correct. I am a retired detective. I retired from the Wichita Police Department in 2019 after
Mhm.
21 years. And then I'm one of those people that I retired at 50, but then unretired with another full time job. So I am currently the health and wellness coordinator for the Sedgwick County Sheriff's Office and been working there since retiring. And then besides that, like you said, I have my own podcast. I also do other things. I created a business within the last couple of years as well. And I'm a holistic health coach, I'm a trainer, and I'm a yoga teacher. More importantly, though, I want to make sure I say this because you're asking me about all the things, is that I'm a mom and a wife, and I love
There
my
you go.
family, and they are definitely my priority and my why. But I think I hit all the main points, right? So
Mhm. Yeah, and there's a lot here that we can talk about as well, because and we're gonna get to all of that here in a moment. I definitely want to have you on the dispatchers roundtable to, kind of go deeper into some of these topics, especially the ones that that you cover, that you work with a lot and all. So let's go back in time. How did you start in public safety to begin with? Now, do you come from a public safety family, or did you have friends in public safety and they're like, "Hey, you should try this out. You'd be awesome."
So, yes, I did. My grandfather was a New York City police officer, so I'm originally
Mhm.
from the East Coast, but I didn't actually find that out until after I decided to be in law enforcement.
Oh.
So, I grew up actually not at all with any influence. No one in my family was in law enforcement or public safety. In fact, I'm one of those people. I haven't really talked about this very much, but I'm one of those people that was influenced very early on by things that went on in my home
Mhm.
to why I wanted to become a police officer. So I'm one of those people that knew I remember at 12 years old knowing this is what I was going to do. And so I just, grew up in a home with alcohol, drugs, lots of things that pointed me in the direction of, you know what, I want to make a difference. So
See, and I ask this because I'm sure you find this in in your podcast as well, or a lot of people that you talk to, because I've noticed it the same way. Is just like you're saying, those life experiences, they push you to want to do better for yourself or do better for others, help people who are dealing with certain situations. Because you have that experience, you're able to relate to them better than someone else who might not have that experience. So, like for example, me taking a phone call on a certain situation, that I have had past experience, and I feel like I would be better for that phone call because of that experience versus someone else. Do you find, I guess, even, with yourself, the way you were saying, some of those things really pushed you forward, not just right in the beginning of public safety, but more stuff along the line as you were going through your career?
yeah, and then of course the more I learned, I knew I just was so driven. I knew I wanted to be actually I knew I wanted to be a detective. Like that was
Mhm.
what I specifically wanted to be, and that's what I ended up doing for a majority of my career. So I reflect back on my career and I lived my childhood dream. I mean, I have no regrets. But now that I know what I know, I can see definitely where things that happened early on to me drove me to do what I did in my career and what I'm doing now. And to the point that I was like really super, maybe a little overly passionate about it because I think that I knew what it was like to be in certain situations, and
Mhm.
I wanted to make sure that I could do what I could to try to not just solve crime. It was fun to catch bad guys too. I'm not going to say that that's not fun, but it's rewarding more than anything to be able to help people resolve things, have closure for families, all of that. So,
What was it like for you in the beginning? Like, what was the training like? And I mean, even the hiring process. Since you've known since you were 12 that this was something that you wanted to do, and as you get older, I mean, how old were you when you first started out? When I started out dispatching, I was 19.
I wasn't that young. So here's
Mhm.
how it went for me because I didn't really grow up with this being encouraged. I went to college. I got a bachelor's degree, and I'm from the East Coast, so I got my degree from Rutgers in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Shout out for anybody from New Jersey listening.
Yeah, yeah.
Woohoo! And, I thought for a minute I was gonna be an attorney, but I think that was influenced by some of the things that my family thought I should do.
Mhm.
And then I started graduate school. So I went to graduate school, got a master's in criminal justice before I started my law enforcement career. And I did things a little backwards, according to what some people say, I guess, is that I was a federal agent first.
Oh.
So, yeah, I when I was in graduate school, I went to Florida International University in Miami, and in grad school, I was able to do an internship at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center for an entire summer. It was a great experience, and that's how I kinda got an in at the time because back when I started in law enforcement, it wasn't like today. It was very, very competitive and challenging to get those jobs. Whereas today, there's a little bit more of a need. It's
Mhm.
a little bit more difficult for all of us in public safety to hire people. So I was able to get a job back in New York, where I was from, with what was then called INS, Immigration Naturalization Service, and now they're DHS, people Department of Homeland Security, and at one point it was also ICE. So it's changed names like several times, but so I started out doing that. So I was a Fed for a few years, but I met my husband in the academy in Glencoe, Georgia, and he was in Wichita, Kansas. So that's how I landed here. And
Mm.
yeah, and so when we were kinda like, "Okay, this is really gonna happen here, somebody's gotta make a move." We were doing the long distance thing for a while. I said I always knew that I wanted to be just a street cop, like, that was something I always wanted to do.
Mhm.
So we kinda made this deal, and obviously it worked out, where I said, "Hey, I'll move there, I'll quit my job as a Fed, you keep your job," because even back then I knew, okay, he makes good money and has good benefits, and I'll just join the police department. And then, honestly, we never ever expected to stay in Wichita. And then we thought we'd go back east, and then we're still here today.
Oh man, that's hilarious. But that's awesome though. I
Yeah.
mean, you went through all of this, you end up going to Wichita, Kansas and staying there and such. But and you did it for 21 years, right? You ended up, like you said, you were 21 years there in Wichita and all. Was there any differences that you found from being a federal agent to end up coming into being in local law enforcement? Was there anything that surprised you, or you were carrying this experience into this other realm, still kind of the same with law enforcement, but there had to have been some differences? Was there anything that surprised you at all?
Oh, yeah, there were a lot of differences. So,
Hmm.
and to finish answering your last question, so I did about 26 weeks of training
Hmm.
for the federal job and then went to the WPD and got another 20 plus weeks of training. So, lots of training. But with my job, first of all, like culturally, going from New York, East Coast to Wichita was quite a culture shock in and of itself. Like
Hmm.
I didn't quite expect how different it was going to be. Now, I did know I had visited here. I used to picture, and I'm not trying to say this in a negative way, but when I thought about Kansas, I thought about the Wizard of Oz. I mean, that's like the only reference I had.
Right.
So when I visited, I knew it wasn't that, but it was a lot different living here than just visiting. And then, of course, with my federal job, I'd only been there for a few years. I was in New York. And at the time, the types of crimes I was investigating and working all had to do with illegal immigration in
Hmm.
these sweatshops in New York City. So those were the kinds of things I was doing. And then, of course, becoming a police officer, you're responding to 911 calls and working persons crimes, property crimes. So there was quite a difference, but I much preferred the patrol work and the cop work.
I can see that there would be, a lot more traffic and a
Mhm.
lot more variety of things that are going on. Now, with the training, was there any difference in the training there? And did you have to do and I don't know if I'll get into this, maybe I will, but the physical part, in the beginning, because there was one time that I almost became a state trooper in the state of Florida.
Mhm.
And I went in for the physical test, and I don't remember what the time limit was. I made it with a minute to spare, but there was some shit that happened to me where, like, my right leg cramped up when I had to do the body, like, the dummy. I had to drag the dummy like 100 feet, or I don't remember what it was, the distance, but my leg cramped up.
Oh, man.
And when when it cramped up, oh my god, I can see it in my head right now, like it was yesterday. My leg cramped up and I fell. And when I fell, my shoe flipped up into the air, and I hear one of the sergeants, was big dude, and he's like, "Get up, Martinez, get up!" And I'm like, "I'm going, sir." And I got up and I started dragging and I ran. I finished that thing with one shoe,
That's
and and
impressive.
and a sock that was completely muddied and destroyed and stuff. And I remember at the end, that same sergeant, he comes up to me. He's like, "Martinez, you got a lot of heart." He goes, "But you need to eat more bananas."
That's hilarious. That's
Oh,
funny.
yeah, it was the funniest thing. So, back to the question for
Okay.
you, did you have kind of like, those physicals and everything going from, being a Fed to, working at local law enforcement and stuff, and, what was that like for you in the beginning?
So I don't have any fun stories like you do. So my leg didn't cramp and I didn't flip over, but I can tell you that that's really what part of what really attracted me to law
Mhm.
enforcement is I really liked that physical part and also the team and camaraderie aspect. So that wasn't really ever an issue for me. Like I took it very seriously and to this day I still do. And I think that it's so important to take care of yourself physically because as cops, we need to be fit mentally
Right.
and physically. But yeah, I mean, I knew what was expected and I never had an issue ever, taking those tests. And in fact, I mean, one of the things that I really liked about being at FLETC was that I had a lot of time in Georgia to do a lot of fitness stuff. So a lot more than what I did when I was in the police academy. We did work out, we did run together, but
Mhm.
so I really liked that aspect of it personally.
How about some of those ride-alongs in the beginning? I mean, did you have any ride-alongs or anything that you did as a Fed in the beginning getting into it, versus, in local law enforcement when you ended up coming to Kansas?
No ride-alongs as a Fed. You just
Mhm.
you do your job, you get trained. Well, we went to our office first for a couple of months, and basically they wouldn't let you do anything because you didn't have a gun. So I sat in the office for a couple months in New York City, got to meet people, and then went to training, and then came back, and you just kind of shadow somebody. So it's not an official like FTO program, but that's kind
Mhm.
of what it was like on the job training. And
Nice.
then with the academy, we did part of your training when you're in the police academy is to do ride-alongs with senior officers, usually FTOs. And then of course, when you get out of your training in the academy, that is part of you have to go through field training before you're out on your own. So
Did you have any interesting times during those ride-alongs?
yes. Oh, yeah. So this it's funny, I haven't thought about this stuff in a while, but I did meet one of my best friends in the academy. She had been out like a year and a half ahead of me. She's now retired as well from the police department, and she's a captain in Derby. Shout out to Sarah. But she she and I, because there weren't a lot of women. There still aren't a lot of women in law enforcement. So it was
Mhm.
kind of neat that I got to ride with her. It was a third shift ride along. We met and um, we got along, we hit it off, and now we're buds, still best buds. But this is the funniest story. So there's a police officer in our town in Wichita,
Mhm.
and he is, I mean, 40 years in law enforcement. This guy is incredible. And I remember a time, excuse me, I was an FTO and I didn't know my geography very well yet. And I'm not from this town.
Mhm.
And we were trying to get to someone who was chasing a car full of burglars, and I was driving, and he's not really familiar with the part of town that we were going to anyway, because he worked on the east side of the tracks. This was on the west side of the tracks. That's what we refer to in Wichita. So I'm going the wrong way. He's banging on the steering wheel and he's getting really, but he apologized. He's a really nice guy, but he was just so ramped up, like he wanted to get there to help and all that kind of stuff. So that's Dirty Harry is his nickname. So that's just one of my stories from FTO.
I asked because, there's so in dispatch, a lot of times in training in the beginning, and it's not like this for every dispatch center, but luckily the two that I was working at, we were allowed to do ride-alongs, and part of the training was the ride-along so that you could see what it's like on the other end and what it sounds like as well to them when we're talking on the radio so that we can kind of, you know, master that art of speech over the radio, that radio etiquette and everything. And one of the times when I was working in Florida, I was doing a ride along with an officer, and her and I were just sitting there stationary, just clocking people, and we were trying to guess, the speed that they were going to be, and we ended up getting a tone out for a fight that was going on at a dance hall that was just down the road. And we're like, oh shit, like, all right, like, here we go. And then woo, so we lights and sirens start hauling ass. But it's such a small town. It was only like a few blocks away. So it's like, and then, and then we pull in. But the funny thing was that everyone had already come out of the dance hall. And when we pull up, there's a guy who's coming, he's a security there. He's coming out with a guy, and I remember he had an epic mullet. And he's walking out with him, and the dude is like struggling and stuff, and the security guard's trying to pull him out. Well, there was another guy walking in back of them who he wasn't doing any of that. He was just simply walking in back of them. A security guard runs out hauling ass, gets right in front of the guy who's not doing anything, and sprays him with pepper spray just all over his face. And he starts screaming and yelling, Dios, por qué Dios? Which is, the translation from Spanish is, oh God, why? Why, God, why? and I'm sitting there bossing up laughing, and the officer I'm with is saying, why, what did he say? What did he say? And I told her, and she's laughing. She's like, great. Now I have to go over there and look at these people and try not to laugh because all I can hear is him yelling, Dios por qué? Why
That's
God? That's why I asked, because everyone has a different story, especially with those ride-alongs and stuff. And I feel bad for some of the dispatchers when I tell some of the ride-along stories that I had, because they're like, oh, nothing happened with me. We just rode around. Like, oh, well, I had some fun
Yes, you did.
during my ride-alongs.
And I remember when I first came out, I worked third shift, which
Mhm.
was overnights, and we had a lot of dispatchers that would ride with different officers. So I think that's such a good idea too. And we would spend time in dispatch a little bit because it gives perspective.
Yes, that is always good. A lot of people have said, how do we bridge this gap in working with different departments and stuff? And it's like, bring them in, have them sit there with you,
Mhm.
especially those who are first starting out in their training, have them go in so that they can understand what it's like in there as well. Because a lot of times, at least in the beginning, when I was first doing it, a lot of officers are like, you guys don't really do anything. You're just sitting there answering the calls, answering the radios. I'm like, hell no. Like, there's
Mhm.
way more to that. So, they would come in to try to help us out. A couple of them had come in to help us out for trees and wires that were down from a storm. 1 hour and they were done. They're like, hell no. Like, I'll go back out on the road. You guys go ahead and take care of this. I'm like, well, you do what you can. Um, so when you first started out in local law enforcement there in Wichita, Kansas, do you remember some of those earlier incidents? Because now things are different. Now, there's a lot more, traffic, like you were saying, there's a lot more traffic that's going on. There's more variety in some of the incidents, and things are they're just, probably going and going. So what were some of those earlier incidents that you kind of dealt with there?
So again, I told you, first started out working overnight, third shift in a part of
Mhm.
town. It's called North Wichita, which is where more of the violent crime was occurring, which is what I wanted. I wanted to work in that part of town.
Mhm.
And what's funny is I just remembered this. Like when people first told me this is like the bad part of town, I was used to the projects in New York, like high rise, and then I went there and I just saw these houses that didn't look that bad to me. But then, of course, once I started working there, I knew exactly what people were talking about.
Ah.
But yeah, just lots of gang activity, shootings. I do remember when I worked my first homicide scene when somebody was murdered. It's kind of hard to get that out of your mind. It made me feel a little bit weak, and then I was okay, but I don't think you can ever really prepare yourself for seeing that. I
Mhm.
remember, without getting too graphic, the person laying on the ground, middle of the night, it was in an apartment complex, and just like the amount of blood that I saw, and I could remember what it smelled like. And until you asked me about an earlier call, I never really think about that very often, but it's something that I don't think I'll ever forget. But what I remember too is that looking at that and then noticing the people that I was working with, like my field training officer, and just how I had a lot of awe for the people that were like, just this is what we need to do, and they were in work mode. Because when you're a person from the outside coming in and looking at that, you're like, whoa, that's
Mhm.
a dead person. So I remember that, and then obviously just moving on and having to go do my job and interview witnesses and knock on doors and things like that. But that was pretty early on when, after I came out that I was able to see that. But there's so many things that pop up. But one thing that I really was impacted by that I never really realized until after, and this is one of the reasons that kind of motivated me to get help for myself and then want to do the same for others. It was when I was first promoted to detective. So this was like 2002.
Mhm.
And I was initially in the domestic violence sex crime section. And I was given a case. And so I don't know what they call it in other parts of the country, but if somebody has committed a crime and it rises to the level of a felony, and in this case it was domestic violence, aggravated assault, but that person's not unseen, there's evidence and the victim has reported this, we issue what's called a felony pickup. So it doesn't have the same power as a warrant because a judge hasn't signed off on it yet, but the officer has the discretion to be able to issue this felony pickup. So I got assigned this felony pickup case, and what I learned was that the victim um, she reported she'd just broken up with her boyfriend and she was driving home and he threw a rock through her window. The glass broke. She got cut from the glass. And there was a lot of other smaller things before that, nothing that had risen to the level of a felony. And to be quite honest, in the grand scheme of things, that's not really a very strong felony case. I'm not trying to detract from what happened, but as far as charging purposes, not really. So I talked to her and I talked to her for about 10 or 15 minutes, get a little bit of a better understanding of what happened, because it's very common to do once you get a case. You talk to the victim yourself. And then I got a hold of the guy on the phone to try to convince him to turn himself in. And because it's just, I told him, I said, listen, you have to come in and deal with this at some point. You might as well come in. That's what we try to do when you get assigned a case. He had agreed to come in and meet with me. He didn't show up. And then he ended up murdering her. So within the next few days, so he was on the run. I was in the process of going to get a warrant for his arrest, and he killed her. So that was really difficult for me because that was very early on in my detective career, and I can't even tell you. Actually, even talking about it, I kind of feel the same. Not quite as emotional, but for days, like I felt like I couldn't breathe. I was like very emotional. It was really hard for me to hold it together because I felt personally responsible for what happened. And of course, I know that I'm not, but it's hard to not take that on. So,
I have to ask,
yeah.
was there were there any programs or anything, or even not so much programs, but in the beginning when you're starting out, did anyone ever tell you like this is the type of stuff that's going to happen eventually? And you're going to have to figure out how to deal with it. And the reason I ask, and this is kind of a good segue too, kind of going into a lot of the other stuff that we're going to be talking about here, is like when I first started out in dispatch, I wasn't, I was told that I was going to be taking, there's going to be some hard calls. This is 911, but there were never any like kind of examples, or no one told me you're going to have to figure out how to deal with this, or here's some resources. If I remember correctly, there wasn't even, well, no, they would say, we've got an EAP program and all this other stuff, but you know there wasn't anything beyond that. So for me in the beginning, when I was taking a lot of these hard calls, I was bearing these calls
Mhm.
and I didn't really have anyone to talk to about it. And also there's that stigma, then, and a little bit now as well. We're trying to smash it though, but you don't want to look weak. You want to be the person who's asking for help, and others say, well, Ricardo can't hack it or something like that. You don't ever want to look like that. But for me, I finally, from learning the hard way, I finally started sharing those stories and opening up, and I found that it was a lot better. So for you, looking back at that specific one or even others in the beginning, did anyone ever tell you, here's a resource, or this is what it's going to be like, or this is how you're going to have to deal with that?
The short answer is hell no. uh,
Yeah.
so which is what obviously why I'm so passionate about making
Mhm.
sure that others know this early on. But so what there's also another thing too, like, so not only did anyone ever really prepare you for this, like in the academy, I've thought about this. They would have somebody come in and talk about like an officer involved shooting they were involved in and the impact that that had, but those aren't always the calls that bother people. So
Mhm.
there's so many more. And so just because you're not directly related in a shooting yourself, as part of your job doesn't mean there's not all these other things. So it was, it wasn't like that. We didn't have anything like that. And then at the time, I think I remember one person saying, "Are you doing okay?" Like, because it was somebody that I was partnered with and could see that I was like getting ready to get upset. And I ran to the bathroom and got myself together. But another thing too is that when you're a woman or a female in law enforcement, you know, there's kind of this unwritten, you need to be as tough as the guys, and there's even more to prove. I'm not saying that it's right or wrong. I'm not even saying that anybody necessarily really felt that way, but I felt that way.
Mhm.
And so I felt like there was that added pressure of don't show emotion because people are just going to chalk it up to you being a girl and not being able to handle it. So yeah, there was nothing. And so like you, I just kind of buried it. The one thing I'm really grateful for now looking back is I always had my husband to talk to. And even though, I mean, my husband continued on with that federal agency, we were both still in law enforcement. So I did talk to him, but I really didn't talk to anybody else. And I probably didn't even talk to him in detail or in depth about how it was really impacting me.
See, and it was good that you had him too, because you have someone who comes from the same place and understands.
Hmm.
Like for me in the beginning, I would try to share, some of these calls, with my wife, and she would just be like kind of looking at me like I don't know what to say. and
Yeah.
and I would say I just want you to listen. But what I didn't think about either was that there's like that secondary trauma that she's going through as well, as I'm telling her all of these hard things. I remember coming home a couple times, and at that time, my my second oldest son, I think he was, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 at the time, and I remember coming home and just hugging him so tight,
Hmm.
and tight to the point where I heard him go, like he grunted because I was squeezing him, and I heard that, and I let go, and he's like, are you okay? I was like, it's just a hard day at work, buddy. Like he didn't know, and now he's 17, and my eldest son is 22, and I talked to them about a lot of the stuff that I did, and I tell them, I'm sorry that I wasn't there for a lot of stuff because I was always working in dispatch. Just know though, I would have loved to have been there, but I was at work helping people who really needed me to help them as well. And they've understood, a lot of that stuff. They've read some of the stuff that I've put out there, and they're like, I don't know how you did this. Like, how
Hmm.
did you do that for all that time? I'm like, I don't know. It was my passion, and it still is. And now, conversations like this are so good because it's a new day. Things are changing,
Hmm.
and they have changed. I feel like around 2016 on, there was a lot more going out there where people were talking about how they were feeling, because a lot of times it felt like we couldn't talk about it. And now the curtain has been pulled back, and we're talking about all of this shit that's been bothering us for so long. And I've had people tell me, "Oh, it just sounds like you guys are whining." I'm like, no, we're not whining. We're talking about this because it's also helping others listen to this who don't have a voice or feel like they don't have a voice. So when they listen to you or I talking about this type of stuff, they don't feel alone. They know that there are other people out there that they can turn to, or at least listen to inspire them or motivate them to get help as well.
Oh, yeah, I couldn't agree more, and it's funny that you bring up the specific year of 2016 because that was like a turning point for me personally. So I
Mhm.
was still working as a detective, I hadn't retired yet, and that was when I slew there was a shift happening for years, and then
Mhm.
it just kinda dawned on me that we need to do a better job, and when I say we, I just mean the collective we,
Yeah.
of taking care of our people and ourselves. So individually and then organizationally. And so I'd been doing yoga. I decided to become a yoga teacher, starting to really, go on my own healing path. And I'm like, I need to try to maybe like include something for somebody else that I know because I saw a lot of my coworkers struggling.
Mhm.
That was something like you said we didn't really talk about, but I people had health problems, people had emotional, mental issues. There were people that I knew that took their own lives. So there was a lot, and so it just kind of hit me. I'm like, we need to do something. And so that's when I first learned about yoga for first responders and really just started going down the rabbit hole of just doing whatever I could to learn about resiliency, taking care of people, what secondary trauma was, how it impacts your body and your mind. And like you said, you hit the nail on the head. We can't keep it to ourselves because I can tell you that I think the number one thing that I have seen since I've been a part of doing peer support, and we now have that's a big part of my job in my current role as wellness coordinator is to manage a peer support team and to help do proactive and preventative efforts and as well as after the fact do debriefings. And it's so transformative for people to know that they're not alone. I think that's
Mhm.
probably the number one thing that I have seen. There's a lot of benefits to it is that knowing that you are not the only person that is feeling that way. You may not have had the same direct experience, right? We all have our own stories and the way that we deal with things, but we feel the emotions are the same and the impact is the same. And that has been probably a game changer. I think you're right that we're able to talk more about this, and for people to hear people that they know or people that they can relate to. It's different than just somebody saying it who they don't, they can't relate to.
How crazy is it that one of the biggest things that we do is communicate, but when we try to communicate with each other,
Mhm. Oh, I
it's
know.
not there.
Right.
What the
Exactly.
hell? Like, what is up with that? And it's like that, all over the place. I just remember being in dispatch and stuff, and us kicking ass and taking names, like a well-oiled machine. We're just pumping, just going, 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 and working, just being badasses and stuff. And then after that, we're kind of talking about certain things, but we don't talk to each other about how we're feeling or how, a certain call went or whatever. It's just, are you all right? Oh yeah, 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 yeah. No, I'm fine, which is bullshit because we're not fine. We bury it because we were afraid, and if I could go back in time, I would tell myself to open up a little sooner, but also introduce myself to yoga and breathing techniques and meditation and a lot of that a lot earlier, because I was going through a lot of shit in the beginning, and
Mhm.
I wasn't really talking about it. It was when I finally was burned out. I loved what I was doing, but there were so many other variables that were going on that was just making it bad, and I just felt shitty, and I ended up going back to school, and all of these projects that I was doing had to do with public safety. I mean, that's how this podcast started, was from a college project that I did in 2010. And it felt good to be able to share stories. And all of that just kept building and building and building to what it is now. But that's all it took, was for me to finally open my mouth and speak. And then, some of the other physical issues that I was having with, just because, I mean, we're sitting sometimes for 18
Mhm.
hours because we're doing overtime and we can't get up because it's so busy. I've got all this back and neck pain and everything going on. And I finally surpassed my own fear of someone making fun of me or mocking me because I'm not doing a pose right or something. And I just went for it. And it was healing. It helped. All that stretching, everything helped, but also putting myself in a spot where, I'm learning these breathing techniques to keep myself calm during the phone call, because if my tone changes in any way, that could freak out the caller.
Mhm.
And it really helped out. So a lot of that stuff, if I could go back in time, I would tell myself that. Now for you, if you could go back in time and tell yourself something, something that you know now, what would that be?
It would actually be very similar. I was thinking about
Yeah.
that because I did not know how to self-regulate. Like, I was just so accustomed to living in, like, my fight or flight stress response that I had no idea. I mean, I did it for years, and I can even trace it back to when I grew up, how I grew up. That's kinda what I was used to, is always kinda being on alert just because of certain ways that, things that were happening in my home. I didn't
Mhm.
realize how that impacted me. So, I kinda just was used to operating like that until my body was like, "Nope, we're not doing that anymore." So it would have
Mhm.
been so nice to have learned, or for somebody to have told me, "Listen, here's some," and explain it to me, because a lot of times I think a lot of us that get into public safety, we wanna know why something, you're telling us to do something, or why something is helpful. Because when I did finally start practicing yoga and learning breathing techniques, I knew I felt better, but I didn't know why. And so until I found out why, I was like, "Oh, that makes perfect sense." So yes, early on somebody pulled me aside and said, "Hey Wendy, just so you know, this is a really great job, but maybe you could do a couple of these things, and throughout your career, who knows, maybe things would have gone a little bit differently." So,
Do you and you talk about your past and everything and some of the things that you dealt with growing up. Do you feel like during your career there in Wichita, do you feel like some of those, like, you excelled more in, let's say, like a domestic call, or those that were dealing with alcohol abuse or anything like that? Some of those calls that you went out to, do you feel like you excelled a little bit more because you had some of that experience, that you brought with you into that?
I can't help but think that my direct experience had some kinda impact on the way I did my job. I didn't know it at the time. Now I
Mhm.
look back and I think, "Well, this is why I wanted to do this, just in general, wanting to serve and help people, especially for those who couldn't advocate for themselves. That was kind of a big thing for me. Um, and what's funny is I'm obviously not from Wichita, Kansas. People don't know the way that I grew up.
Mhm.
So they have no idea that that's what influenced me, or that's kind of where I came from. Um, because I really wanted to make sure, and I don't really know how I'm wired or why I'm wired the way I am, but I knew, even though I knew that things were not right, like as they were happening, I knew this wasn't, I didn't know that other families maybe operated differently, but I'm like, this is not the way I want to be. This is
Mhm.
not the way I want my family to be. But yet, the more I've learned about certain things, I also have a little bit of an understanding about why people become addicted, or what addiction looks like, and how addiction looks so differently for different people too. So it's been like this really big process. But to answer your question, I'm sure it had a direct impact on the way I did my job. I don't know how it can't.
Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. There's a lot of things, like I said, with experience and such that you can bring to the job that helps, but also, is sometimes an aha moment. But and it sounds like, though, the one incident that you're talking about, as you mentioned, it was a game changer. Kind of put things into perspective on um, how it impacted you and how you wanted to help others who are dealing with different situations. So as you continue to go through your career, you start getting into yoga and you start getting into all of these other things. Um, did you kind of know that you were going to move towards, like, did you kind of feel it like you were going to start moving towards this more, because you're seeing a lot more of, let's just say, your coworkers and such who are dealing with certain things, and because you had gone through that already and you were learning more things, that you wanted to teach this to kind of mold some of those who are coming in, but not just that, but to help those who might be struggling in silence, that people don't know, but you're there and you're able to help them.
Well, so it wasn't like that initially. It
Hmm.
was, I'll be honest with you, I was kind of really jacked up for a while. I was kind of in a crappy, shitty place. And
Hmm.
so all of this came from that, really. Like, and when I was going through this and trying to help myself, that wasn't what was in the forefront of my mind. Obviously it is now, but so in just, to give a little bit of perspective, I was for about 15 years always on call, so working those types of cases for a majority of my career, and not really understanding the impact that not getting enough sleep, getting called in, being exposed to trauma, secondary trauma, like how that can build up if you don't deal with it. And
Hmm.
I thought at the time that I was doing myself justice, because very type A personality, hard charging, like I'd work out, I'd get up early and go hit the gym and stuff, eat what I thought was healthy. But there were other things I was doing that probably weren't leading to a holistic lifestyle, which of course I didn't know. I was just doing what what I thought was healthy.
Hmm.
And I now know that doing some of those things was actually working against me. Sacrificing sleep to go to the gym. So even though I had been sleep deprived, and for me personally too, like it was hard for my husband and I to have kids. And I've now learned that, the nervous system, immune system, and endocrine system are they're so deeply entrenched or interconnected, and how some of that affected me. And then when I did have kids, they were born premature and I had a lot of health complications. We had our kids older because of our careers. And
Hmm.
so what finally happened for me was that the stress, I think, of and the impact of just the work, and then my personal things that I had gone through with my health, and then my children being premature, um, I had started having panic attacks. I thought I was having a stroke one day. I laugh now because it's funny to think about this, but it's really not funny. I made my husband take me to the hospital because I think I was just so numb, and I thought my face was numb and that's a sign of having a stroke, and it went down that rabbit hole. But really what was happening is it was just the impact of what was going on had finally caught up to me. And I started having really, like, I have autoimmune issues with my gut, and I started to really want to learn, okay, this is not working for me. I can't continue on like this. And so not only for myself, but it was really for my family too. And so I started to learn and to apply these things to myself. And then, yeah, at some point I was like, I really want to help my peers, not just when it comes to critical incidents, but really you have to kind of widen the lens holistically and look at all aspects of our lives, all of our habits, because like I said, I know for me, I was like, okay, I work out, I'm good. I go to the gym and I eat kind of healthy, but it's so much more than that. But all of that, Ricardo, that came from me and living it and having to go through this myself.
See, and I think again, as I said before, that's why conversations like this are important, and to be able to share our stories and how a lot of the stuff that we went through impacted us and how we learned. Sometimes learning the hard way, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because if it was, if it was easy and everything, I don't know, just people might not do it or whatever. But a lot of the stuff that I learned as well, like you. Um, it was through a lot of the struggle, a lot of the calls, stuff that I didn't realize was going on,
Mhm.
and I would work out as well, and I would think the same thing, like I was good to go. However, what I wasn't taking into, um, just into all of it that was going on with me was that I was also chugging coffee. I was drinking a bunch of energy drinks because I worked midnight shift. I needed to stay awake.
Yeah.
'Cause there were a couple times where I worked 4:30 P to 4:30 A, and when I would drive home, which was about a 45-minute drive home, I would go into that tunnel vision where you're just driving, and then you get to a certain point and you kinda snap out of it, and you're like, "How did I get this far? Like, I didn't realize I was over here because 'cause you're just, like, on autopilot.
Yeah.
And other times, going off the road because 'cause I'm dozing off and hitting that rumble strip and it waking me up. So, I would drink an energy drink or a cup of coffee or 2 cups of coffee around 3:30 so that I would stay awake to get home. But then I would get home and I'm wired,
Yeah.
and I would try to work out. Or other times, I would, even in a winter storm, I would shovel out a path to the grill, and I would grill a steak to have steak and eggs, and I would chug a few beers and then go to sleep. All of this, me thinking that I'm in great shape, I'm working out and everything, but no, I was fucking myself up with
Mhm.
all of the other things, that I was doing, and they're in that learning the hard way as well, because then, I've got all of these different calls that are in my head, certain things that would trigger that I didn't even realize was going on until later on when I finally started sharing these stories, and then it was therapeutic to be able to do that. Did you
Mhm.
find that you're going through all of this and making your transition to everything that you're doing now, that when you started to share that it was actually therapeutic, and you just, like, that weight in your shoulders would just you felt so much better.
Oh, yeah. And I wasn't really like I said, I talked to my husband, but I never
Mhm,
really talked like, I didn't go see a therapist. I mean, I have in the last few years, but back
mhm.
then, I didn't really talk to my friends about this kind of stuff or my coworkers. And what really did it for me was, I will tell you, like a turning point I can identify, and there were several things. I mean, I was on this path anyway. But after I retired, I went to a program. It's called The Battle Within,
Mhm.
and it's located in Kansas City. And it is for any like first responder, retired or active, military. And it was just for me, it was a really good. The reason I point to it is because I was ready to change and ready to overcome. And it was a week of being with other people like you and who are experiencing secondary trauma due to personal things or the job. And I unloaded. Like I talked about things that I hadn't talked about in a really long time. I was like, like when you cry, like you can't even talk because your like lip is quivering, like that kind of
Right.
stuff. Like you're like, oh my
Yeah,
God, where is this coming from? Well,
yeah.
it's coming out because it hasn't, I haven't talked about it. And it was like a catharsis, being able to get all that out and then being supported by people, because you have mentors. And then, of course, you have the people that are going and you're in your cohort with you. And actually, I had several dispatchers that were in my group, which was awesome. So it wasn't just cops. There were a couple of cops, dispatchers. So that for me was like, okay, this is really where I need to continue to be. And so that's really when I started to recognize how important it is. Even though it's hard, because that wasn't easy to do, we have to be more transparent and vulnerable, and it's not easy. So, but knowing it for myself, I felt it. I felt what it was like, and then now I've seen and experienced when other people do it, how it helps them.
How hard was it to kind of clear your mind when you first started doing a lot of this? And I ask because when I first started getting into meditation,
Mhm.
it was the hardest thing. And but also it was because I didn't realize how much these calls were affecting me, how much of an impact there was. So I would sit there and close my eyes. And one of the things that I had read and learned about is, try to picture the flame on a candle and keep your mind on that picture of that flame. And if you're able to, do it, you feel like that warmth throughout your entire body. I've only been able to do that a few times, and it was I can't even explain the feeling. But in the beginning, I struggled, and I almost stopped doing it completely because I thought I'm not going to be able to do this. But I kept going, and I was able to do it. So for you, how hard was it to kind of quiet your mind to get into that state?
Well, so for me, my path to meditating, which I now do every morning, came from my yoga practice
Hmm.
initially. So for me, I would at the end of a yoga class, you do what's called shavasana, and you're quiet and you kind of let everything sink in. And learning breathing techniques, because breathing is one way that people start out when they meditate. It's
Hmm.
mindfulness meditation. So I was kind of doing that without really knowing it. And then I'm like, this is how I am though. I'm like, okay, I need to learn about meditation. So I took about 6 months before I started researching it and learning
Yeah.
about it before I did it. And then I crossed paths with, well, now she's like, not only do we work together, but she's one of my really good friends, Kim Colgrove. She's runs, it's called Pause First Academy.
Hmm.
She's a lifelong meditation teacher, and I went to one of her courses at the recommendation of another kind of wellness resilience person that actually influenced me, named Darren Ivy from the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department. And she told her story, which in and of itself is amazing, that I'll have to share with you because I think she'd be a great guest on this podcast. But
Amazing. Yeah.
she uh she taught she kind of introduced me to meditation. I'd been toying with it for a little bit, and it was definitely a process. And so for me, moving and doing yoga and then meditating is how I started. And then I got to the point where I could just get up in the morning and sit, do a little breathing, and then just sit. And I wouldn't start out for very long. I mean, like I'm talking about 5 minutes.
Hmm.
And some mornings it still is just 5 minutes if I don't have the time. But it was definitely a process, and it still is. I still will sit some mornings and it's hard for things to settle. So it's one of those things. I kind of feel like you're training a new puppy when you're training your mind. I mean, that's
Right.
really what's
Yeah.
happening, because we're really, our minds are designed, now that I know this, like to be on alert for threats. It's like what keeps us alive.
Yeah.
And so it's not normal for us, quote unquote, to be able to just do that. So it's something that I know for me took a while, and it
Hmm.
still is a daily practice. And so that's one of the things I tell people when I introduce meditation to them. And by no means am I an expert, but it's like you have to be patient, and it's
Right.
not a one size fits all approach too. Like you mentioned the candle, I talked about breathing. There's so many different ways that you can even start to meditate. It just kind of depends. But
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a process, but yes, like you said, be patient with yourself, give yourself a little grace because it doesn't happen right off the bat.
Hmm.
And it takes a little bit, but once you get into it, and sometimes in the beginning you might not even realize that you've done it, I guess successfully, in
Right.
lack of a better way to put it. But you get into it more, and you just start to feel better, and your mind is a little more clear. Now, we kind of touched a little bit on, some of the issues that were going on, maybe some of the health issues and everything, but you were going through a few things that ended up spawning the creation of a holistic health program, and it's a coaching program rather, and it's called Radical Resilience. Can you kind of tell us about that?
Sure. Yeah. So, couple. I've been practicing yoga for close to 15 years now. I've been
Hmm.
teaching yoga for 5. And one of the things that I learned in my some later, more advanced yoga teaching or training was something called Ayurveda. It's like the sister science to yoga, and it's basically just a holistic perspective on health. Okay, so ancient wisdom applied to like modern living, essentially. And when you hear just like the basic precept, it's really just so easy to understand, but it's hard for us to apply.
Hmm.
And so once I started learning about Ayurveda, and really the reason I went to it is because it's all focused on the gut and digestion. And making sure that your gut is healthy really has so much to do with the health of every part of your body and your mind. And because I told you I had those issues, that's where I started out. So
Hmm.
I decided to learn and apply as much as I could about it. Really started noticing significant differences in my health and the way I felt, but not only just like physically, but mentally, emotionally started feeling better. And so it inspired me to learn more and become it's a yoga health coaching program. It's a 2-year program, and I just launched my first group. And so the way I've designed the program is that I don't do one-on-one coaching with people. A lot of what I've learned, I actually apply to my full-time job. I just don't tell people that what Ayurveda is, because if I said that word to them, they'd look at me like I was crazy. And they'd be like, "What is that?"
Yeah.
So just like when I teach yoga, I don't say certain words in Sanskrit. But bottom line is it's I do a group coaching program. And the reason why is because from doing peer support for several years now, I've seen the power of dynamic groups and how people that are like-minded, that are similar, that have the same goals, and in this particular case it's making a difference in their health and wellness, how that can really help, not only the accountability, but it propels growth. Like, I think it's like a 7-to-1 more chance that you will reach your goals if you're in a group with other people that are like-minded and being
Hmm.
vulnerable and sharing. So Radical Resilience is a group coaching program where people from, and it's online, so you don't have to be local, and we go through the holistic habits every week, and we support each other, and we do a lot of things about mindset, and really, not that we have time to go over it, but if anybody wants to check out the website, it's all about nutrition. It's the way we move
Hmm.
our body. It's circadian rhythm, about the sleep wake cycle, which a lot of first responders and public safety, we're working against our circadian rhythm because a lot of us work at night. And so we already have that going against us. So that's why kind of instilling and trying to have these habits is even more important, which I referred to earlier, I did not have. So you do have some influence over certain things, even if you're a shift worker. So because there are some people that I've coached that are shift workers.
I feel like this would be really good for dispatch as well. Being part of that first responder brotherhood, sisterhood, as well, because we're sitting for hours
Mhm.
on end, and a lot of what you're talking about, as you're talking about, you know, being healthy and stuff, and eating better. That alone is one of the biggest things that I think destroyed me, was going in for a 12-hour shift, or if I knew it was going to be a 16-hour shift right off the bat, stopping for fast food and getting a big ass bag of whatever, burgers, tacos, or whatever, and then having someone look at me as I'm the only person in the car ordering this whole bag of food and them judging me. I'm like, it's for a 16-hour shift. I'm not going to eat it in one sitting, but just stretching that out and then adding in the coffee, all these other things that are actually hurting me. But if I had a lot more of this information, like what you're talking about back then, I think things would have been a lot different, and
Mhm.
not just for me, but a lot of those that I worked with. So, do you have, a lot of dispatchers or anything yet who are, kind of getting into this? And if not, I'm hoping that with this conversation and things that we're going to be doing together as well, a lot more people will jump on to what it is that you're doing. I think it's amazing.
Well, thank you. So, to answer you, here's some right now. Like I said, I launched the pilot, the group program. It's 8
Hmm.
women. I'm enrolling 5 more for what starts in April. I call it Q2, and it's really it's not limited to any specific person or profession. It's just, is this a good fit for you? And that's why, if anybody listening thinks that this is something they're interested in, I do a couple a week, where what I call them like strategy sessions, where I talk to you about, there's no charge. It's like a free service. I just spend about 30 minutes and just talk about your goals, what you want more of, and what has worked for you and what hasn't. Because a lot of times we don't realize that there's a lot of things that we haven't tried. And so just by getting people on the phone one-on-one, having them have that opportunity to talk, and then seeing, like, the next step would be like, okay, is this something that you would be interested in? Because it goes both ways. I don't want people to just join and pay me money. You have to be willing to be a participant and take an active role in your own health. Like, I can't do that for you, obviously.
Right.
But what's really great about this first group, though, I will brag on them a bit, is that they're all tangentially related to the criminal justice field in some way. Some of them are former first responders, some are in that line of work just because those are the people I know. But it doesn't have to be that. But I also want to make sure that, like, so a lot of this information I'm trying to put out to everybody. So on my podcast, I'll do these microcasts where I'll do a tactical habit, is what I call it. And I'll talk about, hey, this is why it's important to eat an earlier, lighter dinner. Hey, this is why it's important to move your body. Or here, this is something about chronic inflammation. And do you have chronic inflammation? And here are some signs and symptoms. So a lot of what I do in the coaching program, I try to put out in different ways so that people have access to the information for free.
That's awesome. And
Yeah.
you must have been reading my mind, because I was about to go to that part next.
Yeah. Well, and one other thing too, is I mentioned Kim Colgrove, but she owns Pause First Academy. Excuse me. And so it's an online resource for resilience training. I put yoga videos on there. She does meditation. It's such a great resource. And I actually think there's a lot of dispatchers through Mark that have access. They have a membership through Mark where they can access all this information. If somebody you have tons of dispatchers listening. So if they don't know, they have access to it. But I will probably be adding a course on there, tactical habits, something like that, so that people have access to this information. And because I don't want it to just be, okay, you have to pay for it, because I think it's important to be able to spread this information so that people, I want everybody to be, my whole goal is, and I always tell people this, is that when you retire, whatever that looks like for you, because for a lot of police officers, it's 50 is when we're eligible. I'm not saying that's when everyone does. You shouldn't just like make it to the finish line and, just expect to be overweight, on 3 to 5 different prescription medications, have aches and pains, have chronic pain. That's actually not the way it has to be. And I think that we've just been conditioned. That's part of our culture. When you age, you actually should lose weight. You shouldn't have as much weight on your body. And with adopting these habits, you can really make a big difference. And then when you do retire, you're ready to live your best life. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
No, and that's definitely a good spot, because when I finished up my career in dispatch and I ended up going into the private sector of 911, I was doing yoga, I was doing a lot more stuff that it was helping me. Excuse me, but I wasn't feeling all of the effects yet, because I was always on the go. And it seems like when you're always on the go, you don't realize what's going on with your body until you finally take a moment. Or not just if you take a moment, your body tells you you're gonna take a moment, and whether you like it or not, your body is gonna make you rest. It's gonna make you stop. And that's kind of what happened with me when I got out of dispatch, and I'm working now for this 911 solutions company. I'm sitting there and I'm working on different things, and my right shoulder starts hurting, cramping up. My neck is starting to hurt so bad, and the pain enough to where it's going up into my temple and causing like dizziness and everything. And I didn't know what was going on. And I ended up going to the chiropractor, and I remember he gave me an x-ray, and he goes, "Look at yourself on this." And I was like kind of tilted up, like my right shoulder was up a little bit. He goes, "We need to work on that." He goes, what were you doing before this? And I said, well, I dispatched for 13 and a half years. And he goes, you didn't wear a headset? And I said, I did, have a headset sometimes, but a lot of times I was always holding the phone like this. And he goes, well, that's what's going on. He goes, now that you're not in dispatch, everything is finally catching up to you. And we
Mhm.
need to work on this because otherwise it's gonna be bad. He goes, I don't know how bad it's going to be, but it all depends on you and how bad you want to help yourself. I
Right.
can only guide you in a certain way. You have to have the discipline to do this. And it took that and me kind of freaking out a little bit, like, whoa, I need to help others who are still dispatching. So if they don't, I want them to learn from me, basically, is what I was trying to do.
Right. Well, and I think it's funny because I think I emailed you or I texted you or I responded to something on social media, one of my favorite quotes, because I'm kind of a really big quote geek. And it's something I learned when I was in yoga training. If you don't listen to when your body whispers, you're going to hear it scream. So just
Yes.
learning to pay attention to all of those signs and symptoms and signals, because when we're go, 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 because this was me, I never slowed down. I went into overdrive, overwhelm, never stopped until I went to bed. Um, how do you know what's going on if you're not paying attention?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so as we go into the wrap up of this episode, I could talk to you for like hours.
I know.
There's so much that we could talk about. But
Yeah.
we are definitely going to do a dispatchers roundtable because we can go deeper into a lot of these other topics, especially with this last part. So in your email that you sent to me recently as we were building up to doing this episode, which I'm glad we finally were able to do this.
Mhm.
This was great. Um, I have you as quoted here in your email. So this last part, you end up mentioning, while aftercare for trauma is so important, I find this piece is something we need to focus on as well. And that is so true because I think a lot of times we don't focus on it. And I don't know
Mhm.
why it is, but like conversations like this and more that that we're doing and others that are doing as well, people are trying to focus on it now. So going into the wrap up of this, I want to know, why is it so important for us to focus more on this part?
Oh, we're so bad about people that are drawn to this profession. We want to take care of people. And that's where I came from. We're so
Hmm.
good at it, like you said, but you can't. I mean, I know this is cliche, but you can't pour from an empty cup.
Hmm.
And so it's just imperative to really focus, and I think organizations need to push this too. For what we know, I mean, we know the biological connection between mental and emotional stress and trauma and how it impacts our body. So it's almost like we're doing a disservice by not giving people with our organization the opportunity to do these things and to educate them. So it's almost like, to me, if you're not doing it, you're going to have to expect that these certain things are going to happen. It's inevitable. So prevention and being proactive and doing things ahead of time, like I think what I meant in that when I was saying that to you is that we do a pretty decent job of taking care of people after critical incidents. And I am a big believer in that. And I'm
Hmm.
still, that's a big part of what I do. But I'd like to see, and I actually also have a 6 acre kind of yoga retreat not too far from my house where I've started to do events um, for people to take care of themselves while nothing is necessarily wrong, but that you're just learning how to regulate your nervous system, take care of yourself so that you can do this throughout your life and your career.
Perfect. Well, how can people find out more about you, what you're doing? Your podcast, Guns and Yoga, your website, the business that you have, just all of it. How can people find more about you?
Probably the easiest thing to do is I do have a website now, thanks to my husband and cool brother-in-law. It's just wendyhummel.com. So if you
Oh,
go to
perfect.
yeah, wendyhummel.com, and then I also have my podcast, which is Guns and Yoga, and it's on Podbean. So anything really for either of those two things, that's the place to go.
Perfect. That is excellent. So, and can they find the microcasts on there as well for the tactical habits?
Yes. So if you go, it's part of the podcast. So I will
Mhm.
alternate between microcasts and then conversations with guests, like how you do on this show.
Perfect. That
Mhm.
is excellent. So, folks, make sure to check out everything that Wendy is doing. She's awesome and has a lot of things going on. And it has been awesome to have you on here. And I look forward to the next one.
I know I could talk to you forever too, Ricardo.
It's been excellent.
Yes.
I will be right back here with you in just one moment. For those who are watching and listening, if you have any comments, questions, or you want to be a guest on the show, you can check us out and or you can email us rather, and that's wttpodcast@gmail.com. Once again, that is wttpodcast@gmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter, that is @91podcast. You can like us on Facebook, that is facebook.com/within the trenches podcast. This episode has been sponsored by InDigital as well as Rapid Deploy and Carbine. And as always, a big shout out to patrons. If you want to become a patron as well and help support us, you can get some bonus content, some swag, the audio versions of the DRT as well as Open Mic Live. Check us out and support us on patreon.com/WTT podcast. And this can be seen on Facebook, YouTube, as well as Twitter. And then you can listen 24/7 on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, your favorite podcasting app, and withinthetrenches.net. Have a good one, everyone, and we'll see you in the next one.